I had a steak and cheese sub today, 3 slices of cheese pizza, and a bowl filled with cookies and whole milk. The diet's going great, by the way, thanks for asking. Hello everybody, I am Jmulls of Jmulls Gaming, and there's been a topic of conversation percolating throughout the Final Fantasy XIV community that I think is worthy of further discussion, and that is about the overall difficulty of the game. Now, I talked about before in a previous video a couple days ago about the difficulty with implementing, fun gameplay into MSQ because you have to make sure it's easy enough that everyone is able to get through it. Quite a lot of the conversation for that video was actually talking more about the raids and the dungeons and stuff like that. So, screw it, let's have this talk right now. Is Dawntrail too hard? And I would say no. I think a lot of the perceived difficulty that is coming alongside Dawntrail and its new combat stems more so from unfamiliarity than it is actual difficulty. Now, what do I mean by this? And this is by no means a unique idea that I came up with. Quite a few others at least share this same sentiment, and that is, with Dawntrail, they are utilizing new methodologies and ways to display information to the player. New ways to convey mechanics and to showcase a lot of mechanics that we've seen before, just in new and interesting ways. And when you get actually used to them, they're not all that hard. You go back and do a lot of these dungeons, and once you actually know what to look out for, they tend to fall over, at least from what I've done. At the end of the day, they are still just normal dungeons. But I think the design direction that Dawntrail is going for is a really healthy one, because this is an old game at this point. Final Fantasy XIV has been out for well over a decade, and especially if you've played for quite a while, you'll have gotten used to a lot of the ways that Final Fantasy XIV does content and does combat overall. And while, yeah, there's always like savages or extremes or ultimates you can do if you want, it is very important to freshen up the pace of everything and just throw new ideas at the table and just experiment and see what sticks to the wall. If the game doesn't grow and try new things, especially when it comes to the actual content of combat, then eventually it'll just get stale, one-dimensional, and boring. Because at the end of the day, you can't do the same thing for 10 plus years, because not only will it get stale and old, but also would make fights largely forgettable. Think about it like this. I really enjoyed the raids back at Endwalker. And if we're talking strictly normal mode raids, how many of those normal mode raids do you even remember? There's a couple for me, but not too many. And I know the Arcadian is really fresh, but I loved all 4 of those fights. They're fun, they're interesting. But also, they are memorable because not only the aesthetics surrounding them, they have great music alongside them, but also the mechanics are fun and interesting and new. Like, the idea that the third fight has a phase transition because he chugs down an energy drink or whatever, gets DQ'd and no longer is bound by the terms of the rulebook, is a great idea. How many normal mode raids before made you go, oh hell yeah, this is awesome? I would normally go, yeah, this is really cool, but I never felt the exact need to really farm them. That's not the case when it comes to the Arcadian. I can't wait for reset just because I want to play them some more and get the gear. I want to level up my tanks so that I can then tank these fights. And while I don't have a group to run Savage with, I actually want to get a group to run Savage this tier, because it's that fun. This is the important thing when it comes to this whole difficulty discussion, I think, is going under the radar, whereas a lot of the conversation is shifting towards whether or not the game is hard, or should it be harder than it is, or if the game's too hard, we gotta appeal to the casual audience, or that game's too casual and turbo casual, or whatever. New mechanics breed new interesting encounters, and when you throw new things, especially at an MMO audience, which is a genre of game where the fan base is notorious for understanding what it is and sticking into those roots and refusing to budge from its predetermined spot. So anything new that fits outside of those well-defined boundaries that most of the players are well acquainted with will be new and scary and will be hard to understand at first. But a lot of this debate happened on launch day, when everything was still fresh and new. I don't think Dawntrail is really that big of a step up compared to what we've had previously. It's just a lot of new stuff. I would argue that the pace, it definitely feels faster on the whole when it comes to these mechanics, but I don't think that's a bad thing. It's a different flavor, sure, but I don't think the flavor is necessarily bad. And we can get hung up on what a very few amount of people actually say and think, especially when it concerns like forum posts or the off comment you may see in a YouTube section or whatever. But at least in my experience, the majority of people seem to be enjoying the content that is there in Dawntrail. When it comes to the dungeons, the raids, the trials, oh my. Most people seem to be receptive to what is in the game, that seem to be receptive to this new swath of just conveying information to the player, these new ideas, because they're fun and interesting. Because at the end of the day, it's a video game. People want to be engaged by the product. They want to feel good doing the content that they're playing. That to me is an extremely important aspect to game development that a lot of the times is ignored when it comes to MMORPG mechanics in lieu of this conversation of whether or not something is too hard or easy. At the end of the day, it's a game. It needs to be fun, it needs to be interesting, and it needs to be engaging. And just throwing out the same old mechanics we've seen time and time again, over and over again, just in different combinations, it ain't gonna cut it forever. Eventually, something like Dawntrail was needed to test the waters with new mechanics, to test the waters with new ways to convey information, to freshen up the experience, to make it fun and interesting and engaging yet again. And it's actually funny because when Yoshi P and the team talked about how they wanted to experiment and test the waters with new mechanics in Dawntrail, it made sense to me why we weren't going to get a lot of significant job overhauls in 7.0. But now that I'm actually playing Dawntrail, I'm like, oh yeah, this is ever more apparent to me. Even as someone who would like to see quite a few extensive job changes in the future, I think the smart play is what they are doing right now. Testing the waters with new mechanics, with familiar jobs that don't stray too far from the established norms of what people are used to. So you have some semblance of familiarity, but test the waters with new mechanics, new boss fights, new trials, new raids, and all that. See how people are receptive to that, iterate on it over the course of the future tiers, and then once that conversation and that glorified test is played out, then tinker the jobs from there, depending upon if the game now has a new established pace or just a new established feel in terms of fight design, because that is super important when it comes to actual job design. You don't want to do a bunch of sweeping job changes that would suit boss design of old, but not this new style. And like, maybe that's a bit of an exaggeration compared to the exact changes we've had so far, but I think the philosophy rings true no matter how far on that spectrum you really are. And with job design / class design being so important to player retention, like we've seen in games like World of Warcraft over the years, you have to nail that. It's not something you can really like mess around with constantly and bring about a sweeping host of changes all the time. You have to be precise, you have to be exact with those changes. So who knows, maybe playing it cautiously like they are doing right now with Dawntrail is the smart play in the terms of the long game. That's what I think they're doing. That's what I think is also the smarter play. I would also bring up the idea that you can't listen to everyone who says the game needs to be super easy on the whole and in every piece of content, because that also limits just game design on the whole. The easiest mechanic is the mechanic that doesn't exist. That's the truth of it at the end of the day. But just having a static health bar that just barely does anything, that you whack away over the course of like 10 minutes or so, that's not a fun time for really anyone outside of a select few people. A lot of the fights we're seeing in Dawntrail, and especially in things like the Arcadian, are really imaginative and they're clever. The honeybee fight, what a smart thing to do. Instead of just having vuln stacks like the game has always had, make it a resource to actively manage throughout the fight. I imagine it'll be way more interesting and savage, but it gets the job done in normal. There's always that like threshold to where pugging it, which is what normal modes will generally have to satisfy, like you don't want the content to be so hard that you are consistently wiping in random groups weeks after it came out, because at that point that's just not fun. Really, having to like reprog the same fight with a whole bunch of different people over and over and over and over again, I just don't think that'll be the case with these raids. I don't think we've crossed that proverbial line in the sand when it comes to fight difficulty for normal mode content in Dawntrail. This is one of the things I think they expertly executed on. And if in a few weeks we are seeing most groups wipe all the time on these fights, then sure, we can have this conversation then. I just don't think we're at that stage. Now, granted, maybe I'm wrong on that, and maybe it's just I haven't had the groups I've seen or played with wipe too much on these fights or in these dungeons, but I don't think I'm wrong. At the end of the day, if the game is going to grow and evolve and try and become a better version version of itself that it is today, it has to be willing to take risks in every aspect of game design. It has to be willing to upset people every now and then. That is simply the way of it. The biggest killer for an MMORPG is apathy, is stagnation and boredom, is simply for people to no longer care. And I don't think we're at that stage or at the danger of getting to that stage with Final Fantasy XIV yet, but they got way out ahead of that, especially when it comes to Dawntrail. Because sure, the MSQ was polarizing. I have heard nothing but mostly praise when it comes to the actual content of Dawntrail. And with the Arcadian being that good and that seemingly well received, I'm excited, so excited for what the Alliance raid can bring to the table later on, for what the new exploration content can bring to the table later on. If they're gonna go full experimental and just say, screw it, let's throw all the rules away and just have fun with the game again, I'm all for that. I'm open arms, do what you will. The patch cycle for Dawntrail easily has the potential to be the hypest patch cycle that Final Fantasy XIV has ever seen, simply because the content coming down the pipe has so much potential to be even better than what it was at 0.0. We haven't even gotten most of the endgame yet. We haven't gotten Cosmic Exploration. We haven't gotten the new Bozja. We haven't gotten even one Alliance raid yet. We haven't gotten a new Deep Dungeon or new variant dungeons or whatever. There's so much potential for the rest of Dawntrail. I am gleefully optimistic for its future. So no, in my opinion, I do not think that Final Fantasy XIV Dawntrail is too hard. I think it's different. And that's the important thing. Because from what I've played, they're not going for arbitrary difficulty for difficulty's sake. They're going for new mechanics, new combinations of mechanics, new ways to telegraph mechanics to the player to freshen up the experience and to make it more fun and interesting and engaging. And that to me is the right call and the right decision. And with that, I will call the video there for the day. Thank you all for tuning in. My pleasure making the video. If you enjoyed it, please leave a like and subscribe. Comment down below with your favorite fight in Dawntrail. I'd love to hear your thoughts, to hear your opinions, and to hear why it's the honeybee, simply because of that song. It's infectious, isn't it? Though real talk, I love A4. Thank you all for tuning in. Stay safe, have a great day. I'll see you all next time. Bye-bye, everybody. Until we meet again.